Tom Bradbury from ITV.
Mr. President, you've talked about the need for robust action on your country's deficit and debt positions. Do you agree with the Prime Minister's supporters that he led the way on the issue, or do you feel that, in fact, he has travelled too far and too fast? And could I just ask you both as a sidebar, this time last year we talked about the case of computer hacker Gary McKinnon, on which the Prime Minister has expressed very clear views. You said you would work together to find a solution, so have you found one?
Well, on your second question, Mr. McKinnon, we have proceeded through all the processes required under our extradition agreements. It is now in the hands of the British legal system. We have confidence in the British legal system coming to a just conclusion, and so we await resolution, and we'll be respectful of that process. With respect to how we deal with debt and deficits, I said 2 years ago, the first time I came here in April of 2009, the first G20 summit that I attended, that each country is different. And each country is going to have to make a range of decisions about how to, at that time, dig our way out of the worst recession that we'd experienced since the 1930s. At the same time that we put our countries on a path of sustainable growth that ultimately results in jobs and prosperity for our people and a growing middle class across the board. And we've succeeded in the first part, which is to yank the world economy out of recession, and that was in large part due to concerted action between the United States, the United Kingdom, and other countries. Now we've got that other challenge, which is how do we sustain growth in a way that's responsible and responsive to the needs of our people. That requires us to continue to make investments in education, science, technology, infrastructure, things that help our economies grow. But it also means governments that live within their means. And obviously the nature and role of the public sector in the United Kingdom is different than it has been in the United States. The pressures that each country are under from world capital markets are different. The nature of the debt and deficits are different. And as a consequence, the sequencing or pace may end up being different. But the one thing that I'm absolutely clear about is David and I want to arrive at the same point, a point in which we're making sure that our governments are doing what they need to do to ensure broad-based prosperity, but doing so in a responsible way that doesn't mortgage our futures and leave a mountain of debt to future generations. And the other point I think David and I would agree on is that this is going to be a constant process of trying some things, making adjustments. There are going to be opportunities for us to make investments. There are going to be other areas where we think those were good ideas at the time, programs that were started with the best of intentions, and it turns out they're not working as well as they should. If a program's not working well, we should get rid of it and put that money into programs that are working well. It means that we've got to make sure that we take a balanced approach and that there's a mix of cuts, but also thinking about how do we generate revenues so that there's a match between money going out and money coming in. And each country is going to have to go through what is a difficult and painful process. What I'm confident about is that we're going to be able to come out of this stronger than we were before. And I think that both the people of the United Kingdom and the people of the United States want to see a government that's reflective of their values, the fact that they take their responsibilities seriously, they pay their bills, they make sure that their families are cared for, they make sacrifices where necessary in order to ensure that their children, their grandchildren are succeeding, and they want those same values reflected in their government, and I think that both our countries are going to be able to achieve that.
Thank you. First of all, on the case of Gary McKinnon, I mean, I understand the widespread concern about this case, and it's not so much about the alleged offence, which everyone knows is a very serious offence. It's about the issue of the individual and the way they're treated and the operation of the legal system. And as the President said, making sure that legal system operates properly and carefully. The case is currently in front of the Home Secretary, who has to consider the reports about Gary's health and his well-being, and it's right that she does that in a proper and effectively quasi-judicial way. I totally understand the anguish of his mother and his family about this issue. We must follow the proper processes and make sure this case is dealt with in the proper way, and I'm sure that that is the case. On the issue of deficit reduction, I mean, I remember when we also spoke about this at the G20, but even before that, when you first came here when you were running as candidate. And I completely agree with Barack that each country is different and has different circumstances. I mean, Britain does not have a reserve currency. We're not in the same position as the US with the dollar. And I think it was necessary for us to set out on the path of deficit reduction without delay after the election. And I would argue the proof of that for the UK has been what has happened in capital markets. And as the President just said, capital markets treat different countries differently. Well, in the European context, what you've seen since the election is actually market interest rates in the UK, bond yields effectively come down. Whereas if you look at what's happened in Greece or in Portugal or other European countries, you've often seen those bond rates increase. That, in my view, is the risk we would have run if we had not set out on the path of deficit reduction. But each country is different. But when I look across now and see what the US and the UK are currently contemplating for the future, it's actually a relatively similar program in terms of trying to get on top of our deficits and make sure the debt is falling as a share of GDP. Because, as the President said, we in the end share a very similar set of values about not wanting to load responsibility for these debts on our children and not wanting to shirk our own responsibilities for straightening out our own public finances. So as he said, we may take slightly different paths, but we want to end up in the same place. It's an extremely difficult thing to have to do, dealing with your public finances, getting on top of your deficit, but it's absolutely essential. And we've talked a lot today about national security. In the end, there's no national security unless you have economic security. And that's an argument that we have to make and win every day here in the United Kingdom.